I got to Fort Blackwood on a Tuesday afternoon. The Montana sun was bright but didn't do much to warm things up. My duffel bag dug into my shoulder as I walked from the transport vehicle toward the main entrance. The concrete walls looked exactly like what I'd expected. Gray, imposing, functional. The base sat nestled between mountains, isolated from pretty much everything. I'd heard it was remote, but seeing it in person drove home just how cut off it was. No towns nearby, no civilian population for miles, just military and mountains. I adjusted my bag and nodded to two soldiers passing by. They barely looked at me. New faces probably came and went often enough that nobody got excited about it. The entrance to the main building had a security checkpoint with a bored-looking guy checking IDs. I fished mine out and handed it over. "Quinn, Levi, transfer from Fort Carson," I said. He glanced at it, checked something on his computer, and handed it back. "Down the hall, take a right, third door. Captain Rivera's waiting." I thanked him and headed down the corridor. The fluorescent lights hummed overhead, making everything look flat and washed out. My boots echoed on the polished floor. The place smelled like industrial cleaner and recycled air. The third door had Capt. J. Rivera on a nameplate. I knocked twice. "Enter," came a voice from inside. I stepped in and saw a tall man with silver-gray hair sitting behind a desk. He didn't stand up when I came in, just looked me over with eyes that didn't miss much. "Sir, Private First Class Levi Quinn reporting as ordered." Captain Rivera nodded slightly. "At ease, Quinn. Drop your bag and have a seat." I set my duffel down and took the chair across from his desk. The office was military neat, nothing out of place, no personal items except a service plaque on the wall. The desk had stacks of folders arranged in perfect alignment. "Your transfer came through faster than expected," Rivera said, opening a folder I assumed was mine. "Your CO at Carson speaks highly of your communications expertise." "Thank you, sir." Rivera flipped through a couple pages. "Fort Blackwood serves a specialized purpose. We monitor and analyze communications across a wide spectrum. Your primary duties will be on the night shift in the comms center, processing and routing intercepts according to protocol." He slid a keycard across the desk. "This gets you into the barracks, mess hall, and common areas. You'll get separate clearance for the comms center when you report tomorrow at 0600. I took the card. "Yes, sir. Barracks assignment is B12. You'll be sharing with Private Alvarado." He closed the folder. "Any questions?" I had plenty, but most would probably be answered during orientation. "What's the typical rotation for night shift, sir?" 2200 to 0600, 4 days on, 2 days off. Standard procedure is in the manual you'll receive tomorrow." Rivera checked his watch. "Mess closes at 1900. I suggest you get settled in and get some food." It was a dismissal if I'd ever heard one. I stood up. "Thank you, sir." He nodded and turned his attention to another folder. I grabbed my duffel and headed out. Finding the barracks took some wandering. The base layout wasn't complicated, but the buildings all looked the same. Concrete blocks with small windows and numbered entrances. I finally found B12 and used my keycard to get in. The room was small but functional. 2 beds, 2 footlockers, 2 desks. One side had a few personal items scattered around. A book, some energy drink cans, a jacket thrown over the chair. The other side was bare, waiting for me. I dropped my duffel on the empty bed and started unpacking. Standard stuff. Uniforms, PT clothes, toiletries, a few personal items. I was just finishing when the door opened. A guy about my height but skinnier walked in. He had shaggy blonde hair pushing regulation limits and wide green eyes that looked surprised to see me. "Oh hey, you must be Quinn," he said, closing the door behind him. "I'm Caden Alvarado." "Levi," I said, shaking his offered hand. "Just got in." "Sweet. Met the Iceman yet?" When I looked confused, he added, "Captain Rivera, that's what everyone calls him." "Yeah, just came from there. Brief and to the point." Caden laughed. "That's Rivera all right. Tells you exactly what he wants you to know and not a word more." He sat on his bed. "So you're comms, right? Night shift?" I nodded. "Starting tomorrow." "Same. I've been here about 8 months." He leaned forward. "Did Rivera tell you anything about, the history of this place?" "Just that it's a monitoring station. Why?" Caden looked toward the door like he was making sure nobody was listening. "Man, there's stuff you need to know that the brass won't tell you." I sat on my bed. I'd heard this kind of talk before. Every base has its rumors and ghost stories. Like what? Like why they have so much trouble keeping people here. Why they bring in newbies like you every few months. He lowered his voice. Like what happened to Noah Day. Who's Noah Day? Who was Noah Day? Caden's eyes got wider. Sergeant who was stationed here 3 years ago. Smart guy, decorated, totally normal, until he started hearing things. I tried not to roll my eyes. Classic ghost story setup. Hearing things? Voices, at night. Said they'd start around 0100, just whispers at first coming from the vents. Then they got louder, started saying his name. Caden was fully into storyteller mode now. After a couple weeks, he stopped sleeping, started looking like hell. Command sent him to the medic who gave him sleeping pills. Let me guess, I said. The pills didn't work. Worse, he took all of them, but not to sleep. Caden made a gun with his fingers and pointed it at his temple. They found him in the shower, left a note saying he couldn't take the voices anymore. I'd heard variations of this story at every base I'd been stationed. There was always some tragedy, some warning, some curse. That's rough, I said, trying to sound sympathetic while unpacking the last of my stuff. That's not all, Caden continued. There have been 4 deaths since I got here, 2 accidents and 2 transfers who just disappeared during night shift. Now I knew he was bullshitting me. People don't just disappear on a military base, Caden. They do here. Ask anyone who's been here more than 6 months. He leaned in closer. There's a reason we have the rule. What rule? The midnight rule. Nobody leaves their room between midnight and 0400 unless they're on assigned duty. And even then, you stick to well-lit areas and main corridors. I couldn't help but laugh. Seriously? And people follow this rule? Everyone who wants to stay alive does. Caden wasn't laughing. Look, I know how it sounds. I thought it was bullshit too when I got here. But there's something wrong with this place at night. The guys who've been here longest, they won't even talk about it. They just follow the rules. I finished organizing my footlocker. Well, I'm on night shift, so I guess I'll be breaking this rule regularly. Night shift is okay as long as you stay in the comms center. It's well lit, and there's always at least 4 people on duty. Caden shrugged. Just don't wander the corridors alone after midnight. I'll keep that in mind, I said, not keeping it in mind at all. Every military installation had its superstitions. Fort Carson had stories about a phantom patrol that would appear on foggy nights. Before that, I'd heard tales of haunted barracks, cursed equipment, forbidden areas. It was just something bored soldiers did to entertain themselves and scare the new guys. Mess closes in 30, I said, checking my watch. I should grab some food. I'll walk with you, Caden offered. Show you the quickest way. The mess hall was half empty when we got there. The food was standard military fare. Not great, not terrible. Caden introduced me to a couple other guys from our unit. They were friendly enough, asking the usual questions about where I'd been stationed before, what I thought of Blackwood so far. Nobody mentioned any midnight rules or mysterious voices. After dinner, Caden showed me around the parts of the base I had clearance for, the gym, rec room, PX. It was all pretty standard. By the time we got back to our room, I was ready to crash. First day at a new post always wore me out. I've got early shift tomorrow, Caden said, grabbing his toothbrush. You'll be okay finding the comms center in the morning? I'll manage, I said. Thanks for the tour. No problem. And hey, he paused at the door. I know the midnight stuff sounds crazy, but just be careful, okay? I nodded, mostly to get him to drop it. After he left for the bathroom, I got ready for bed, thinking about the day ahead. New post, new duties, new routines to learn, the usual. The next 3 days went by in a blur of orientation, training, and getting used to the night shift schedule. The comm center was a windowless room filled with monitors, computers, and specialized equipment. My job was mostly monitoring certain frequencies and flagging anything that matched specific patterns. Boring work, but it required attention to detail. Nobody in the comm center mentioned ghosts or midnight rules or mysterious disappearances. They were all professional, focused on the job. If Caden's stories had any truth to them, these guys weren't concerned. On my 3rd night, I finished my shift at 0600. The sun was just coming up as I walked back to the barracks. The morning air was cold and crisp, and the mountains looked massive against the lightening sky. Despite the late hour, I felt wide awake. The night shift was starting to mess with my internal clock. When I got to our room, Caden was still asleep. I moved quietly, not wanting to wake him. I was about to hit the shower when I noticed something on the floor by the door, a folded piece of paper that must have been slipped under while I was on shift. I picked it up and unfolded it. At the top, in all caps, were the words, "Survival Rules." Below that was a numbered list. 1. Never leave your room between row 0 and 0400 unless on assigned duty. 2. If you hear your name called, ignore it, no matter who it sounds like. 3. If you see movement in dark corridors, do not investigate. 4. If your electronics malfunction after midnight, do not attempt to fix them until morning. 5. If you feel sudden cold, return to populated areas immediately. 6. If you see someone you know in an area they shouldn't be after midnight, they are not who you think they are. Do not approach. I snorted and crumpled the paper. Caden must have gotten some of his buddies to help with his little prank. Or maybe it was standard procedure to haze the new guy with scary stories. I tossed the balled-up paper into the trash can by my desk. Childish stuff. I'd been through worse hazing at other posts. I grabbed my shower kit and headed to the bathroom, not giving the note another thought. I woke up to screaming. It was far off, maybe from another building, but clear enough to jolt me awake. I sat up in bed, blinking in the darkness. The digital clock on my nightstand read 2:15 a.m. The scream didn't repeat. I strained my ears, wondering if I'd dreamed it. The barracks were quiet, except for Caden's soft snoring from the other bed. Then I heard it. Footsteps in the hallway outside. They were slow and deliberate. Not the hurried steps of someone responding to an emergency. Not the stumbling gait of someone coming back drunk from the rec room. Just slow, measured steps, pausing every few seconds. I realized they were stopping at each door. The footsteps would walk a short distance, pause, then continue. Walk, pause, continue. Working their way down the hall. Getting closer. I slipped out of bed, my bare feet hitting the cold floor. Caden was still asleep, oblivious to whatever was happening. I moved to my desk and fished the crumpled paper from the trash can, smoothing it out in the dim glow from my alarm clock. The footsteps were getting closer. They'd stop at a door, wait maybe 10 seconds, then move on to the next one. I glanced at rule number 6 again. If you see someone you know in an area they shouldn't be after midnight, they are not who you think they are. Do not approach. The footsteps stopped right outside our door. I quickly reached over and switched off my small desk lamp. Then I moved to the door and quietly slid the deadbolt into place. Standard barracks doors weren't supposed to have deadbolts, but someone had installed this one anyway. I'd noticed it earlier but hadn't thought much about it. 3 knocks sounded on the door, firm but not loud. "Levi, you awake?" It was Danny Carruthers' voice. "Something weird is happening. You hear that screaming? I think it was Lloyd. He's freaking out about something." I didn't move, didn't answer. Danny was in a different barracks building altogether. He had no reason to be in our hallway at 2:20 in the morning. "Levi, Caden, you guys in there? I could use some help, man." The voice was Danny's, but something about it wasn't right. The cadence was off, too measured, too careful. I pressed my back against the wall next to the door, hardly breathing. Caden was still asleep somehow, his breathing unchanged. "All right, guess you guys are asleep. I'll check back later." The footsteps moved away, continuing down the hall. I heard knocking at the next door, then muffled conversation, then the sound of a door opening and closing. My heart was pounding. I stayed by the wall, listening as the pattern repeated. Footsteps, knocking, conversation, door opening, door closing. I don't know how long I stood there. 20 minutes, maybe 30. The footsteps eventually faded away down the hall. I checked the clock, 2:47 a.m. I went back to my bed but didn't lie down. I sat on the edge, the survival rules paper still clutched in my hand. Caden slept on, completely unaware. Around 3 a.m. I heard the footsteps again. Coming back down the hall, same slow pace, same pause at each door. They stopped outside our door again. This time the knock was softer, almost hesitant. "Hello?" A woman's voice this time, young, worried. "Is anyone awake? There's been an accident at the medical facility. We need help." I frowned. Fort Blackwood didn't have a medical facility, just a small infirmary with a medic on duty during the day. "Please, if anyone's there, we need assistance. People are hurt." I didn't move, didn't make a sound. The voice changed then, deeper, older. "Levi, son, you in there? It's Dad. Your mom and I came to surprise you." My stomach dropped. That was my father's voice. The exact way he called me when I was a teenager, still living at home. "Your mom's waiting in the car. We drove all night to get here." I closed my eyes. My parents lived in Ohio. They wouldn't show up unannounced at 3 a.m. at a restricted military base in Montana. "Levi, honey," my mother's voice now. Perfect inflection, the way she slightly stretched out the first syllable of my name. "We're worried about you. The guard at the gate said there might be something wrong with you." I pressed my hands over my ears, but it didn't help. "Levi, please open the door. River isn't feeling well. We need to come inside." My mother would never refer to herself in the third person. The knocking started again. Not urgent pounding, but a slow, rhythmic tapping, like someone had all the time in the world. Tap, tap, tap. "We know you're in there, Levi. We can hear you breathing." Tap, tap, tap. "Open the door, Levi. Open the door." Tap, tap, tap. I backed away from the door and moved to the small closet in the corner of the room. I slipped inside, pulling the door mostly closed but leaving a crack to see through. The tapping continued for what seemed like forever. Then it stopped. "We'll come back for you, Levi." My mother's voice, but wrong. Hollow somehow. "We'll always come back for you." The footsteps moved away. I stayed in the closet, watching the room through the crack in the door. Caden never stirred. I remained there until the first gray light of dawn showed through our small window. Only then did I crawl out, muscles stiff from hours crouched in the same position. Morning light seeped under the door. My watch showed 6:30. I uncurled from the closet, my back and legs screaming from hours crouched in the same position. Pins and needles shot through my feet as I stood. I stretched, trying to get blood flowing again. Caden was still asleep, breathing evenly under his blanket. How he'd slept through everything last night was beyond me. Maybe he'd taken something. Maybe he was just used to it. I picked up the crumpled rules paper from where I'd dropped it on the floor. The paper felt ordinary enough, just standard printer paper with typed text. Nothing special about it. But after what happened last night, I wasn't so quick to dismiss it anymore. I folded it and tucked it into my pocket. Then I grabbed my towel and toiletry kit. Maybe a shower would help clear my head. I needed to figure out what the hell was going on at Fort Blackwood. I unlocked the deadbolt as quietly as I could. The metal slid back with a soft click. I turned the handle slowly and pulled the door open. The hallway was empty, completely empty and silent, but something wasn't right. Dark stains marked the beige linoleum floor. They formed a trail leading toward the stairwell at the end of the corridor. The stains looked wet, glistening in the early morning light from the windows at each end of the hall. I stepped out of my room, closing the door behind me. The stains were reddish-brown. Blood. Had to be. My first thought was Danny Carruthers. That voice last night had pretended to be him. I remembered hearing a door open somewhere down the hall after the knocking. I moved quietly to Danny's door. His room was 4 doors down from mine. The blood trail seemed to start right outside his room. I knocked softly. "Danny, you in there?" No answer. I knocked again, harder this time. "Danny, it's Levi Quinn." Still nothing. I tried the handle. It wasn't locked. The door swung open easily. The smell hit me first. Metallic. Strong. I knew that smell from my deployment. Danny was on his bed. He lay on his back, arms spread out to his sides, wrists slashed open. The mattress was soaked with blood. His face was pale gray, eyes open and staring at the ceiling. "Shit," I whispered. I stepped inside, scanning the room. Danny's roommate wasn't there. The other bed was empty and neatly made. On Danny's desk sat another copy of the survival rules, the same 6 rules that were on my paper. But this one had something written across the bottom in what looked like red ink. Failed rule number 6. Don't approach familiar people in wrong areas after midnight, as they're not who they appear. Danny had opened his door last night. The thing pretending to be me had gotten him to open up. I backed out of the room, pulling the door closed. I leaned against the wall, trying to think. I needed to report this, but who would believe what happened? And what about the other doors I'd heard opening? I followed the blood trail down the hallway toward the stairwell. When I reached it, I pushed open the heavy fire door. Luis Rodriguez lay crumpled at the bottom of the first flight of stairs, his neck twisted at an impossible angle. His eyes were open, staring blankly up at me. More blood pooled around him. Jesus Christ, I muttered. I moved down the stairs carefully, stepping around Luis's body. I checked for a pulse even though I knew it was pointless. His skin was cold. The blood trail continued down the next flight of stairs. I followed it, my hand sliding along the metal railing. The trail led to the basement level. The basement corridor was dimly lit with flickering fluorescent lights. The blood smears were thicker here, like something had been dragged. I followed the trail to a storage room. The door was partially open. I pushed it wider with my foot and peered inside. The body on the floor was barely recognizable as human. Jorge Chavez lay sprawled on the concrete, his chest torn open, limbs twisted and broken. His face was the only part relatively untouched, frozen in an expression of terror. I stepped back, fighting the urge to vomit. I'd seen combat deaths before, but nothing like this. This was something else entirely. I made myself check the rest of the basement. 2 more bodies in the laundry room. Kevin Walsh and another guy I didn't recognize, both with similar injuries to Jorge. I headed back upstairs, moving quickly now. I checked the first floor common areas, found another body in the rec room. That made 6. When I got to the second floor, I found the 7th. A guy named Lloyd Harvey slumped in a chair in the small kitchenette, throat cut so deeply his head was nearly severed. 7 soldiers, all dead, all found away from their rooms. I returned to my room. Caden was finally awake, sitting on the edge of his bed, rubbing his eyes. "Morning," he mumbled. "Caden, something happened last night." He looked at me, suddenly more alert. "What do you mean?" "People are dead. 7 that I've found so far." His face went pale. "Who?" "Danny, Luis, Jorge, Kevin, Lloyd, couple others I don't know well." "Shit," Caden whispered. "Shit, shit, shit. You didn't hear anything last night? Nothing at all?" He shook his head. "I take sleeping pills. Doc prescribed them when I first got here. I don't hear anything once they kick in." That explained why he slept through the knocking. "We need to report this," I said. Caden nodded, but didn't move. "You know what they'll do, right?" "Same thing they always do." "What do you mean?" "They'll clean it up. Write it off as accidents. Transfer anyone who saw too much." I didn't believe him, not completely. 7 dead soldiers couldn't just be swept under the rug. I used the phone in our room to call the command center, told them what I'd found. They said they'd send someone right away. By noon, the barracks was crawling with people. Not MPs like I expected, but civilians in unmarked black SUVs. They wore plain clothes and carried equipment I didn't recognize. They said nothing to us as they moved through the building. Captain Rivera arrived around 12:30. He found me sitting in the common room, away from the activity. "Private Quinn," he said, sitting across from me. His face gave nothing away. "I understand you discovered the bodies." "Yes, sir." "And you were in your room all night?" "Yes, sir." "Did you see anything unusual?" I hesitated. The survival rules were still in my pocket. There was knocking at my door around 0200, someone pretending to be Danny Carruthers. Rivera's expression didn't change. "Pretending?" The voice wasn't quite right, and Danny wouldn't have been in our building at that hour. Rivera nodded slightly. "You didn't open your door?" "No, sir." "Good." He slid a folder across the table to me. "Your transfer orders. You'll be leaving for Fort Carson in 3 days." I stared at the folder. "Sir, standard procedure after incidents like this." His tone made it clear there would be no discussion. "What about the investigation? Don't you need statements?" "The official report will list these deaths as a series of accidents, a gas leak causing hallucinations leading to self-harm and falls. That's not what happened." Rivera's eyes hardened. "That is what the report will say, Private Quinn, and that is what you will say if anyone asks. Am I clear?" "Yes, sir." "Good." He stood up. "Pack your things. You're being moved to temporary quarters until your transfer. A driver will take you there in 1 hour. What about Caden? Private Alvarado is being reassigned as well." Rivera left without another word. I sat there holding my transfer papers, trying to make sense of it all. 7 men dead, and they were calling it an accident. Shipping out witnesses, covering it up. I pulled the survival rules paper from my pocket and read it again. Someone had tried to warn us. Someone knew what was happening at Fort Blackwood, and now I knew too. I had an hour to get my shit together. Not much time. The transfer order sat on my bed while I grabbed my duffel from under it. No way I was leaving without digging deeper. I shoved clothes and toiletries into the bag, not bothering to fold anything. My mind kept jumping between the bodies I'd found and that thing in the hallway last night. Whatever spoke with my parents' voices wasn't human. A knock at the door made me jump. I checked my watch, 40 minutes left before my ride. "Yeah?" I called. "It's Sergeant Walsh," a voice answered. I opened the door to find a guy in his 30s with a buzz cut and tired eyes. Not someone I recognized. "You Quinn?" he asked. "Yeah. I'm Kevin's brother. They said he died in some kind of accident." His voice cracked slightly. "I just got here. They're not telling me anything." I glanced down the hallway, then pulled him inside and shut the door. "It wasn't an accident," I said quietly. "I found him in the basement. Him and 6 others. Walsh's face hardened. "What happened to my brother?" I hesitated. "Something killed them. Something that shouldn't exist." "What are you talking about?" I showed him the rules paper. "Did Kevin ever mention anything about this? About voices at night or things walking the halls?" Walsh read it, his expression shifting from confusion to recognition. "He called me about 3 weeks ago, said people were talking about some midnight rule. I thought it was just barracks bullshit." "It's not." I took the paper back. "Listen, I'm being transferred out in an hour. They're covering this up, but I need to know if this has happened before." Walsh rubbed his face. "Kevin mentioned a guy named Ortiz who transferred out last month. Said he knew something about the night stuff." "Where is he now?" "Colorado Springs, Peterson Air Force Base." I nodded. "Thanks, I'm sorry about your brother." After Walsh left, I finished packing, then headed to the admin building. I needed to check something before they shipped me out. The records office was nearly empty, just one bored-looking specialist typing at a computer. "I need to check something in personnel files," I said, flashing my ID. "Captain Rivera asked me to verify some information before my transfer." The specialist barely looked up. "Terminal 3 is open." I sat down at the computer and logged in. First, I searched for Noah Day. His file came up with a big red "deceased" stamp across it. Cause of death: suicide. I scrolled through his service record, exemplary until his last month at Fort Blackwood. Then came reports of erratic behavior, paranoia, and finally, the shower incident. Next, I searched for incidents similar to Noah's. It took some creative keyword combinations, but eventually, I found what I was looking for. 3 years before Noah, a Corporal James Winters, suicide after reporting voices in the walls. 6 years before that, Private First Class Miguel Sanchez, found wandering the base perimeter at 3 a.m., died 2 days later in a fall down a stairwell. The pattern went back decades. Every few years, someone died after reporting strange occurrences at night, and after each death, there were transfers. Lots of them. I checked my watch. 20 minutes left. I needed to go deeper. I tried accessing the base's historical records, but hit a clearance wall. Time for Plan B. The base library was in the same building. I hurried there, nodded to the elderly civilian librarian, and made my way to the local history section. There had to be something about Fort Blackwood's origins. I found a thin book titled Military Installations of the Northern Rockies. The Fort Blackwood chapter was brief but revealing. Established in 1952 as a communications outpost during the early Cold War, built on land purchased from the state of Montana that had previously been part of the Blackfoot Nation territory. A footnote caught my eye. Construction was delayed for 6 months following protests by local tribal elders who claimed the site was sacred ground used for spiritual ceremonies. I flipped through more books until I found something called Native American Sacred Sites of Montana. The entry about this area was disturbing. The valley between the 3 peaks was considered a thin place by the Blackfoot people, a location where the boundary between worlds was permeable. Tribal records indicate the area was used for vision quests, but was later avoided after several disappearances in the late 1800s. 15 minutes left. I returned the books and headed for the archives in the basement. The door was unlocked, which seemed odd, but I didn't have time to question my luck. The archives were a maze of filing cabinets and shelves. I went straight to the section marked Base Operations Historical. Nothing useful in the first few drawers, just maintenance records and supply requisitions. Then I noticed a cabinet in the corner with a newer lock than the others. I tried it anyway. Locked, of course. I looked around and spotted a small key hanging on a hook behind the archivist's desk, labeled Restricted Files. Worth a shot. The key worked. Inside the cabinet were folders arranged by decade, each labeled Night Disturbances, Classified. I grabbed the earliest one from the 1950s. The first report was dated June 12, 1953. Oro 200 hours. 3 soldiers reported hearing voices calling their names from outside barracks. Investigation found no personnel in area. More reports followed. Knocking on doors at night. Soldiers found wandering in restricted areas with no memory of how they got there. And deaths, always explained away as accidents or suicides. A memo from 1957 caught my attention. Following incident with Private Lewis, recommend implementation of curfew protocol. All personnel to remain in quarters between 400 hours unless on duty. The first version of the midnight rule. I checked my watch. 5 minutes. I needed to go, but one more folder caught my eye. Project Threshold, 1972. I grabbed it and stuffed it inside my jacket. As I turned to leave, a voice spoke from the doorway. Finding anything interesting, Private Quinn? Colonel Miller stood there, the base's second in command. Tall, gray-haired, with cold eyes. Just curious about the base's history, sir, I said, trying to sound casual. Curiosity can be dangerous. He stepped closer, especially about things you don't understand. 7 men are dead, sir. Accidents happen. Not like this. Miller's expression hardened. Let me give you some advice, Quinn. Take your transfer. Go to Fort Carson. Forget what you saw here. And if I don't, then you might not leave at all. He smiled thinly. The entity that walks these halls at night has claimed many soldiers over the years. Some who didn't follow the rules. Others who asked too many questions. My blood ran cold. You know about it. We've been studying it for decades. Miller gestured around the archives. Every incident, every interaction, every death, it's all data. You're using us as lab rats. We're trying to understand something beyond human comprehension. Miller checked his watch. Your transport leaves in 2 minutes. I suggest you don't miss it. He stepped aside to let me pass. I walked quickly toward the exit, the stolen folder pressing against my ribs. Just before I reached the door, Miller called after me. Quinn. I stopped, but didn't turn around. The rules keep changing because it keeps adapting. Remember that. I hurried upstairs and out of the building. My phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. Not everyone here is your enemy. Check your email. When I got to my temporary quarters, a sparse room in the visitors' barracks, I found an email waiting for me from a blank address. The subject line read, I wrote the rules. The message was brief. Basement of Building C, Storage Room 5, combination 26 to 1432. Come at 2330 hours. Don't be seen. I had 3 hours to wait. I used the time to read through the Project Threshold folder. Most of it was in scientific jargon I couldn't follow, but the summary was clear enough. Fort Blackwood had been built specifically to study the nocturnal phenomenon. At 11:25 p.m., I slipped out of my room and made my way to Building C. The base was quiet, most personnel either asleep or on duty elsewhere. I kept to the shadows, avoiding the security cameras I'd spotted earlier. The basement door was unlocked. I descended the stairs slowly, using my phone's flashlight to guide me. Storage Room 5 was at the end of a long hallway. The door had an old combination padlock. I dialed in 261432 and it clicked open. Inside, the room was filled with old equipment and boxes. At first, I didn't see anything unusual. Then I noticed a section of the wall that looked slightly different from the rest. I pushed against it, and a hidden door swung inward, revealing a small room lined with bookshelves. The shelves held dozens of notebooks and journals, arranged chronologically. The oldest dated back to 1954. I grabbed the first one and opened it. My name is Sergeant James Cooper. If you're reading this, you've discovered what I have, that something inhuman walks the halls of Fort Blackwood at night. The journal detailed Cooper's experiences with the entity and his first attempts to understand its patterns. At the end was a crude list of observations. It comes after midnight, it can mimic voices, it can't enter a room unless invited. The next journal from 1961 added more observations, then another from 1968, and on through the decades. Each survivor had added to the knowledge, refined the rules, passed on what they'd learned. The most recent journal was dated just 6 months ago. Inside the front cover was a note. I'm being transferred next week. I've left copies of the rules in every barracks. If you're reading this, you've survived your first encounter. The rules will keep you alive if you follow them. It was signed, Specialist Michael Ortiz, the same Ortiz that Kevin Walsh's brother had mentioned. Behind the journals was a metal box. Inside were photographs, audio recordings, and a USB drive. I pocketed the drive and flipped through the photos. They showed shadowy figures in hallways, distorted faces pressed against windows, and strange markings on walls, all labeled with dates and locations. A notebook at the bottom of the box contained personnel records, lists of soldiers who had been stationed at Fort Blackwood. Some names were highlighted in yellow, aware, others in red, taken, and some in green, transferred. Captain Rivera's name was on the first page, highlighted in blue with the note, Controller. I flipped through more pages until I found my name, highlighted in yellow with yesterday's date next to it. Caden's name was there too, marked in green. The final pages of the notebook contained a detailed log of experiments, soldiers deliberately placed in certain areas at night, observers recording what happened, notes about the entity's behavior when presented with different stimuli, and Rivera's signature at the bottom of every page. The truth hit me like a punch to the gut. Rivera wasn't just covering up what happened here, he was directing it, selecting soldiers to test the entity's behavior, observing our reactions, learning how it operated by watching it hunt us. I took photos of everything with my phone, then carefully replaced the journals. As I was about to leave, I noticed a final notebook hidden behind the others. It was newer than the rest, with current subjects written on the cover. Inside were detailed profiles of everyone currently stationed at Fort Blackwood, including psychological evaluations and notes about our potential usefulness to the study. My profile read, Quinn, Levi, combat experience, highly skeptical, rational thinker, likely to resist supernatural explanations. Recommend for Phase 2 testing. Caden's profile was more disturbing. Alvarado, Caden, sensitive to paranormal phenomena, history of night terrors, deliberately placed with skeptical roommate Quinn to observe interaction dynamics. We had been paired on purpose. The last page contained a memo from Rivera to someone called Director. Subject Quinn has shown unexpected resilience. Recommend transfer to Site B for further observation rather than termination. His skepticism makes him valuable for testing the entity's adaptive capabilities. I wasn't being transferred. I was being moved to another test site. I didn't bother knocking this time. I pushed the door open and found Rivera sitting at his desk, reading through some paperwork. He looked up, not surprised to see me. Private Quinn, you should be preparing for your transfer. I pulled out the folder and slapped it on his desk. Project Threshold, that's what you call it, right? The thing that killed 7 men last night. Rivera's expression didn't change. He just looked at the folder, then back at me. Where did you get that? Does it matter? I know what's happening here. I know this isn't some gas leak or accident. You're using us as test subjects. Rivera sighed and leaned back in his chair. He reached over and pressed a button on his phone. Cancel my next appointment. Then he gestured to the chair across from his desk. Sit down, Quinn. I stayed standing. I'm good. Suit yourself. He picked up the folder and opened it, flipping through a few pages. So, you found some classified documents. What exactly do you think you know? I know you've been studying whatever this thing is since the 50s. I know soldiers have been dying here for decades. I know you paired me with Caden deliberately. And I know my transfer isn't a reward. It's because I've seen too much. Rivera nodded slowly. You're right about most of that, but there's a lot you don't understand. Then explain it to me. Rivera stood up and walked to a cabinet behind his desk. He unlocked it and pulled out a thick binder. What we're dealing with here isn't something science can easily explain. We've been studying it for decades, yes, learning its patterns, developing protocols. Protocols that get people killed. No, Rivera's voice hardened. Protocols that save lives. Without them, the casualty rate would be much higher. He opened the binder and turned it so I could see. Inside were photographs, dozens of them, of dark, shadowy figures in hallways, distorted faces pressed against windows, and strange markings on walls. What is it? I asked. We don't know exactly. Some kind of entity that manifests between midnight and 4 a.m. It can't physically harm anyone directly, but it can influence them. Make them harm themselves or others. By mimicking voices. That's one method, yes. It learns, adapts. In the 50s, it could only copy voices it had heard around the base. Now it can pull voices from your memories, people you know, family members. He flipped through more pages. It feeds on fear and confusion. The more scared you are, the stronger it gets. I thought about the knocking on my door, my father's voice, my mother's. And the rules, the midnight curfew? They work. We've tested them extensively. The entity can't enter a room unless invited. It can't harm you if you don't engage with it. The rules aren't perfect. It's constantly testing boundaries, finding new ways to trick people, but they're the best defense we have. So you just, let soldiers die to gather more data? Rivera's jaw tightened. We take every precaution. Everyone stationed here receives the rules, directly or indirectly. But we need to understand this thing if we're ever going to contain it or neutralize it. And my transfer? Where am I really going? Fort Carson, like your orders say. But you'll be debriefed there first, evaluated, then reassigned to another research facility if you're deemed suitable. Another site like this one. Similar, yes. There are 3 others. Each studies different aspects of the phenomenon. I shook my head. And if I refuse? That's not an option, Quinn. You know too much now. Either you continue with the program or... He let the sentence hang. Or what? You'll kill me? Make it look like an accident? We don't kill our own people, Quinn. But there are ways to ensure your silence. Memory treatments, psychiatric holds, dishonorable discharge with a psych evaluation that would follow you for life. He closed the binder. Or you can be part of something important. Something that could save countless lives if we ever figure out how to control it. By risking more lives. By taking calculated risks, yes. That's what soldiers do. Rivera leaned forward. Your transfer is tomorrow morning. Until then, you'll remain in temporary quarters. I suggest you use the time to think about your future. I stood there for a moment, anger and frustration boiling inside me. Those 7 men, did they have to die? No, they broke protocol. They left their rooms after midnight. They opened their doors when they shouldn't have. Because they didn't know the rules. They all had access to the rules, Quinn. Some chose not to believe them. He looked at me pointedly, like you did at first. I couldn't argue with that. I'd thrown the rules in the trash when I first got them. If I hadn't retrieved them, I might have been one of the bodies I found. Get some rest, Quinn. Your transport leaves at 800 tomorrow. Rivera gestured to the door. And Quinn? I wouldn't wander around after dark tonight if I were you. The entity tends to focus on those who know about it. I left without another word, the warning hanging in the air behind me. I spent the rest of the day in my temporary quarters, a small room in the visitors' barracks with a single bed, desk, and bathroom. I went through everything I'd learned again, looking at the photos I'd taken of the journals and logs, checking the USB drive, which contained audio recordings of the entity's voice manifestations that made my skin crawl. By nightfall, I'd made up my mind. I wasn't going to let them shuffle me off to another research site. I'd play along for now, get to Fort Carson, then find a way to get this information out. Someone needed to know what was happening here. I tried to sleep, but every sound in the building had me on edge. The hum of the heating system, footsteps in the hallway, voices from other rooms. Normal, everyday sounds that suddenly seemed threatening. At 1:58 a.m., I was still awake, staring at the ceiling. Then I heard it. A scream from somewhere in the building, different from the one I'd heard the night before. Higher pitched, more desperate. I sat up in bed, heart pounding. It was starting again. The screaming stopped abruptly, followed by silence so complete it felt unnatural. Then came footsteps in the hallway outside my room. Slow, deliberate steps that paused at each door. I got out of bed and moved to the wall beside my door. This room had a deadbolt too, and I'd locked it as soon as I was inside. I checked it again now, making sure it was secure. The footsteps stopped outside my door. 3 soft knocks. Levi, it was Danny Carruthers' voice. The same voice I'd heard the night before. The same voice that belonged to a man whose body I'd found with slashed wrists. Levi, are you awake? I need to talk to you. I didn't respond. I pressed my back against the wall, trying to control my breathing. Levi, please. I'm scared. Something's happening to me. I don't understand what's going on. The voice changed, becoming Jorge Chavez's. Quinn, man, help me. It hurts. Everything hurts. Then Lloyd Harvey's voice. Why didn't you help us, Quinn? You could have saved us if you'd come out. One by one, it cycled through the voices of the dead soldiers, each one pleading for help, each one blaming me for not saving them. I closed my eyes, trying to block out the sounds, but they kept coming. Then it switched tactics. "Son?" My father's voice, exactly as I remembered it. "Levi, what's going on? They called us, said you were in trouble. We drove all night to get here." My mother's voice followed. "Levi, baby, please open the door. We're worried about you." I clenched my fists, nails digging into my palms. It wasn't them. It wasn't real. "Levi Quinn," a new voice now, Captain Rivera's. "This is a direct order. Open this door immediately." I almost laughed at that one, as if Rivera would be wandering the halls at 3 a.m., knowing what was out there. The knocking changed, becoming harder, more insistent. The door shook with each impact. "Let us in, Levi." Multiple voices now, speaking in unison. "Let us in. Let us in. Let us in." The pounding grew more violent. I heard the wood start to splinter, saw the door frame beginning to crack. Whatever was out there, it was getting stronger, more desperate. I remembered something from the journals I'd read. The 7th rule, hidden in the later entries. Words that supposedly weakened the entity temporarily. "I see you," I said, my voice shaking slightly. "I know what you are. You have no power here. You cannot enter. You are not welcome." The pounding paused for a moment. Then came a low, inhuman growl from the other side of the door. "I see you," I repeated, louder this time. I grabbed my duffel bag and headed out to the transport vehicle. It was 800 on the dot and the driver was already waiting, engine running. I didn't look back at Fort Blackwood. Didn't want to. 7 dead soldiers and whatever that thing was last night. I'd seen enough. The driver didn't say much, just checked my transfer papers and nodded for me to climb in the back. The survival rules were folded in my pocket. I'd made a fresh copy before leaving, just in case. The original was safely tucked into my wallet. "Long drive ahead, sir," the driver said, pulling away from the curb. "About 4 hours to our destination." "I thought we were going to Fort Carson," I said. He glanced at me in the rear view. "Change of plans. Orders came in this morning." Great. More secrets. I leaned back against the seat and watched the mountains through the window. The morning sun hit them just right, making them look peaceful, beautiful even. Hard to believe what had happened behind us. I must have dozed off because the next thing I knew, we were pulling up to a checkpoint. Not Fort Carson, not any base I recognized. The sign just said, "Military Installation 27," with no other identifying markers. "Where are we?" I asked. "Your new post, sir," the driver said, handing papers to the guard at the gate. The guard waved us through after checking my ID. The base was smaller than Blackwood, maybe a third of the size. Looked newer too. Clean lines, fresh paint, modern security cameras at every corner. The driver pulled up to a low building marked Administration and cut the engine. "They're expecting you inside, sir." I grabbed my bag and headed in. The air conditioning hit me as soon as I opened the door, a welcome change from the summer heat outside. A woman in uniform sat at the front desk, typing away at a computer. Her name badge read Martinez. "Specialist Quinn reporting," I said. She nodded without looking up. "Colonel Hayes is waiting for you. Down the hall, last door on the right." I followed her directions, my boots squeaking on the polished floor. The hall was empty, quiet except for the hum of air conditioning. At the end, I found a door marked Cole T. Hayes, Commanding Officer. I knocked twice. "Enter," came a woman's voice. I stepped inside to find a tall woman with short gray hair standing behind a desk, 2 silver eagles on her shoulders. She didn't smile, didn't offer to shake hands, just motioned to the chair across from her desk. "Specialist Quinn, have a seat." I sat, keeping my duffel between my feet. Colonel Hayes remained standing, studying me like I was a puzzle she needed to solve. "You've had an interesting few days at Fort Blackwood," she said finally. "Yes, ma'am." She opened a drawer and pulled out a thick folder with red tape across it. "Classified" was stamped on the cover in bold letters. She placed it on the desk between us. "Before I open this, I need to know exactly what happened last night, in your own words." I told her everything. The knocking, the voices, how the entity tried to trick me by mimicking people I knew. I told her about the survival rules and how I'd found the journals in the storage room. I mentioned Captain Rivera's admission that they were using soldiers as test subjects. I didn't hold anything back. When I finished, she nodded slowly. "And you said the words from the journal? The ones meant to weaken it?" "Yes, ma'am." I see you. I know what you are. You have no power here. You cannot enter. You are not welcome. It seemed to work. At least it bought me some time. She smiled for the first time. Good. That's very good. She pushed the folder toward me. This is for you. You've earned the right to know. I hesitated before opening it. The first page was a document dated 1952 titled Project Threshold, Containment and Research Protocol. I flipped through more pages, reports, photographs, diagrams of Fort Blackwood's layout with certain areas marked in red. Fort Blackwood was never just a military communications center, Colonel Hayes said. It was built specifically to contain and study the entity you encountered. I looked up from the folder. Study it? Why not destroy it? We've tried, multiple times. It can't be destroyed by conventional means. The best we can do is contain it and learn from it. I kept reading. According to the documents, Fort Blackwood sat on what they called a breach point, a place where the barrier between our world and something else was thin. The entity had been there long before the military arrived. Local tribes avoided the area for centuries. There are others, Colonel Hayes said quietly. Other entities, other breach points. We have facilities like Fort Blackwood across the country, small, isolated bases where we can monitor and contain these phenomena. I found a page listing similar installations, 12 in total, each with its own code name. Installation 27, where I was now, was listed as Command Center Alpha. So what am I doing here? I asked. Why bring me into this? Colonel Hayes sat down finally, folding her hands on the desk. Because you survived. Not only survived, but adapted. Most soldiers who encounter these entities either break down completely or deny what they've seen. You did neither. I just followed the rules. Exactly. And then you investigated. You gathered information. You made connections. Those are the qualities we look for. Look for? She nodded. Fort Blackwood serves two purposes: containment of the entity and identification of potential recruits for our specialized teams. Every soldier assigned there is carefully selected based on psychological profiles. We watch how they react to the phenomena. Most get transferred out after a few months. Some, like your friend Caden, show sensitivity to the paranormal but can't handle direct contact. And a very few, like you, show the right combination of skepticism and adaptability. I sat back, trying to process what she was telling me. So I wasn't just being transferred. I was being recruited. Yes, Captain Rivera recommended you for Phase 2 evaluation after observing your initial reactions. Last night confirmed his assessment. I thought about the 7 dead soldiers, those men who died. Were they part of your test, too? A shadow crossed her face. No, that was unfortunate. The entity has been growing stronger lately, more aggressive. The soldiers who died all broke protocol in one way or another. We tried to warn them with the rules, but they didn't believe them, like I almost didn't. Exactly. I closed the folder and looked up at her. So what happens now? Now I offer you a choice, Colonel Hayes said. You can take a standard transfer to Fort Carson with a non-disclosure agreement and a memory suppression protocol that will blur the details of what you experienced. You'll serve out your enlistment and return to civilian life. Or you can join us. Specialized Containment Unit 7. We study and contain these entities. We protect people from things they don't even know exist. Fighting monsters, I said. Fighting is rarely effective. Containing, understanding, establishing protocols, that's what we do. Sometimes the best defense is simply knowing the rules. I thought about it. Part of me wanted to run as far from this as possible. But another part, the part that had methodically investigated Fort Blackwood instead of just accepting the transfer, was curious. And there was something else too. Those 7 soldiers hadn't known what they were facing. Maybe if someone had made them understand the rules. What exactly would I be doing? Training first, learning about the different types of entities we've cataloged. Then field work, investigating reports, establishing containment protocols, teaching others how to survive encounters. Like writing new survival rules. She nodded. Exactly like that. I took a deep breath. I'm in. Colonel Hayes stood and extended her hand. Welcome to SCU-7, Specialist Quinn. I shook her hand, still processing everything. She pressed a button on her desk, and a moment later, a young soldier appeared at the door. "Corporal Chen will show you to your quarters. Training begins tomorrow at 600. I grabbed my duffel and followed Corporal Chen through a maze of hallways to a small but private room. It had a bed, desk, and locker. Standard military accommodations, but without a roommate. "Mess is open until 2000 hours, Chen said. "Common room is down the hall if you need anything." After he left, I unpacked my few belongings. Last thing out of my bag was the copy of the survival rules I'd made. I took a thumbtack from the desk drawer and carefully pinned the rules to the wall above my bed. They seemed almost childishly simple now, knowing what I did about the entity, but they had kept me alive. I sat on the edge of the bed, thinking about how quickly my life had changed. A week ago, I was just a soldier doing a boring communications job. Now I knew the military wasn't just fighting human enemies. There were things in the darkness. Things that had rules, weaknesses, patterns. Things that could be understood, even if they couldn't be destroyed. The weight of that knowledge settled on me. Some military legends were based on terrible truths. Sometimes blind obedience to rules written by those who faced darkness before was the only defense against unseen horrors.